When we say that tears are the language of the soul, we're not indulging in metaphor for its own sake. We're pointing towards something fundamental about the human condition. Tears emerge when the weight of experience exceeds the capacity of words. They are not a calculated choice, not something rehearsed or constructed like sentences. They bypass conscious reasoning altogether and flow directly out of the deepest layers of the psyche. That is why when someone we love begins to cry, we don't need an explanation to know that something profound is taking place. The tears themselves communicate what no elaborate speech ever could. They speak to us in a primal way, carrying truths we might not even be able to name. Think about how often we are lost for words in moments of overwhelming emotion, when standing at a funeral, when watching a child take their first steps, when hearing the voice of someone we've missed for years. In those moments, the intellect falters, language fails, and yet the experience demands expression because what is within us cannot stay contained forever. Tears are the body's answer. They are the overflow of meaning, the release of something that cannot be reduced to simple description. They reveal that the heart contains dimensions of experience that the tongue cannot capture. This is precisely why tears hold such power. They are unfiltered honesty. You can lie with words, you can manipulate, you can pretend, you can construct narratives to protect yourself or mislead others. But tears, real tears, are different. They break through the defenses we try so hard to maintain. They show us and those around us what is undeniably real. That is why we feel such a strong impact when someone cries. We instinctively recognize that what we are witnessing is not performance, but truth. And truth, when revealed without disguise, has the power to move us in ways nothing else can. Philosophically speaking, tears reveal the limits of reason. Modern society places a high value on rationality, on solving problems, analyzing data, and keeping emotions under control. But there is a dimension of life that resists calculation. You cannot measure grief. You cannot quantify love. You cannot solve despair with logic alone. In these domains, the language of the heart takes precedence, and that language often emerges as tears. In a sense, tears testify to the mystery of being human, reminding us that we are not machines of logic, but creatures of profound emotional depth. Psychologically, tears serve another purpose as well. They provide integration. When an experience overwhelms us, whether through loss, joy, or fear, the emotional intensity threatens to fragment us. Crying helps to bring those fragments back together. It is as if the act of crying organizes chaos, releasing tension from the body and restoring coherence to the mind. That is why people often feel lighter, calmer, or more centered after a good cry. The tears themselves do the work of healing, even if we cannot explain why. Consider also how tears often emerge at thresholds, moments of transition, moments where something old is passing away and something new is being born. People cry at weddings, at funerals, at graduations, at reunions. What do all of these moments have in common? They mark change, and change, whether welcome or unwelcome, shakes the foundations of our being. Tears allow us to process that upheaval, to surrender for a moment to the immensity of what we are experiencing, and then to move forward. Without that release, we risk becoming hardened, disconnected from ourselves, or trapped in emotional stagnation. It is also worth noticing that tears do not only communicate outwardly to others, they communicate inwardly to ourselves. When you cry, you are admitting something to your own heart. You are saying, "This matters to me." You may have suppressed that truth for days, weeks, or even years, but tears force you to confront it. They demand honesty with oneself, and that honesty, though painful, is the beginning of transformation. Because you cannot heal from what you refuse to acknowledge, and you cannot move forward while denying the depth of your own feelings. Tears drag those feelings into the light, making them impossible to ignore. Now, some people try to hold back their tears to bury them under a mask of strength or indifference. They think that to cry is to lose control, to expose weakness, but this is a misunderstanding. Tears are not weakness. They are testimony. They are proof that you are alive, that your heart still responds to beauty, to loss, to love, to injustice. A person who can no longer cry has not grown stronger. They have grown numb, and numbness is not strength. It is the absence of life. So when we say that tears are words the heart can't say, what we are really pointing to is the sacred role they play in human existence. They bridge the gap between silence and speech, between what we feel and what we can declare. They remind us that some truths can only be lived, not explained. And they challenge us to honor those truths instead of burying them. If you allow yourself to see tears in this light, you will begin to realize that they are not something to be ashamed of, but something to respect. They are not an interruption of life, but an essential part of it. To dismiss tears is to dismiss part of your own humanity. To accept them is to open yourself to the full range of human experience, the joy, the pain, the love, and the loss that make life worth living in the first place. So the next time you feel tears rising, don't fight them. Let them speak. Let them say what words cannot, because in those unspoken words lies the most authentic truth of your heart. And remember this, when language ends, truth still finds its voice, and it often speaks in tears. Crying is so often misunderstood. From childhood, many of us are told not to cry. Boys especially hear it as a command. Don't be weak. Don't let anyone see you cry. The message seeps deep into the psyche, and it convinces us that tears are evidence of fragility, of failing to control ourselves, of not being able to stand strong against the world. But if you look closely, if you analyze the psychological and philosophical reality of crying, there's something far different. Crying is not weakness. It is the courage to be vulnerable, and vulnerability is not the absence of strength, but its highest form. Think about it. What does it take to remain closed off, to keep the world at a distance, to build walls around your heart so no one sees your pain? It doesn't take strength. It takes fear. It takes fear of rejection, fear of being misunderstood, fear of exposing your humanity to others who may not know how to handle it. And so people hide behind their masks. They put on armor. They pretend that nothing touches them. But that's not resilience. That's avoidance. True resilience emerges when you allow yourself to be seen as you are, unguarded, unpolished, unprotected. And that precisely is what happens when you cry in front of someone else. From a psychological perspective, vulnerability is what makes human connection possible. So, if you never show your inner world, your doubts, your sadness, your fears, you never give others a chance to respond with empathy. And empathy is the glue that holds relationships together. It is only when you show your weakness that someone else can show their care. It is only when you risk being honest that someone else can choose to meet you there with honesty of their own. Tears invite connection in a way no amount of carefully chosen words can accomplish. They cut through pretense and lay bare the soul. And when you do that, when you stand there in your raw humanity, you discover that others are drawn closer, not further away. Philosophically, this speaks to the paradox of strength. We tend to define strength as the ability to endure without bending, to remain untouched by suffering. But a tree that never bends eventually breaks. Strength, in its truest form, is not rigidity but flexibility. It is not the absence of pain, but the capacity to feel pain fully without being destroyed by it. Tears are evidence of that capacity. When you cry, you are not collapsing. You are releasing. You are allowing the wave of emotion to move through you instead of hardening against it. And that act, though it may look fragile from the outside, is precisely what prevents your heart from shattering inside. There is also something profoundly moral about vulnerability. To cry is to admit, I cannot carry this alone. It is to acknowledge that you need others, that you are not self-sufficient in every moment. And that humility is at the root of ethical living. No one is an island. No one makes it through life untouched by grief, loss, or despair. When you allow your vulnerability to be seen, you remind others of their own humanity, of their own limitations, and of the fact that we are all in this together. In that way, your tears can awaken compassion not only in those who witness them, but in those who reflect on their own hidden pain. Some might say, but what if I cry and people think less of me? That is the risk of authenticity. It's true, there are people who will misinterpret your vulnerability as weakness, who will use it against you, who will fail to understand. But ask yourself, are those the people whose opinions should govern your life? Do you really want to be measured by those who cannot see the value of honesty? Better to risk misunderstanding than to live locked away from the possibility of genuine connection. Because those who do understand will see your tears for what they are, not defeat but bravery. There's also a psychological healing component to vulnerability. When you suppress tears, you are not just hiding them from others, you are hiding them from yourself. You are refusing to acknowledge your own pain. That refusal doesn't make the pain disappear. It drives it deeper, where it festers, where it hardens into bitterness, resentment, or despair. Vulnerability interrupts that cycle. When you allow yourself to cry, you admit, yes, this hurts. That admission is the first step toward healing. You cannot heal what you refuse to feel. Tears make the wound visible, and only then can it begin to close. Let's also not forget joy. Tears are not reserved only for sorrow. They appear in moments of profound happiness, when laughter and relief overflow the boundaries of the body. To cry at the birth of a child, to cry when you're reunited with someone you thought you'd lost forever, that's not weakness. It's gratitude made visible. Vulnerability in these moments reveals that your heart is alive to the full spectrum of experience. It is open, not numb. It is willing to risk pain for the sake of love, because it understands that love without risk is not love at all. So when you think of tears, don't picture weakness. Picture strength that is so great it does not need to disguise itself. Picture a heart that refuses to become stone, even when life tries to harden it. Picture courage, the courage to be seen, to be known, and to be loved, not for the mask you wear, but for the truth you embody. And here is the reflection I want to leave you with. It is far easier to hide behind a false image of strength than to reveal your vulnerability. But easy does not mean noble. Easy does not mean true. If you want to live fully, if you want to connect deeply, if you want to heal honestly, you must learn to see your tears not as a failure, but as a form of strength that few are brave enough to display. Because the strongest person in the room is not the one who hides their tears, it is the one who has the courage to let them fall. When you stop and think about it, one of the most remarkable things about tears is their universality. We live in a world divided by culture, by language, by ideology, by status, and yet there is something about tears that cuts through all of those barriers. When you see another human being crying, you don't need a translator. You don't need a dictionary. You don't need to know their background, their story, or even their name. You immediately understand something important, something deeply human is taking place. Tears communicate across every border because they belong to the shared fabric of human existence. And this is precisely what makes them so powerful. We spend much of our lives trying to bridge the gap between ourselves and others. We struggle to explain who we are, what we feel, what matters to us. We debate, we argue, we persuade, and still so often we are misunderstood. But when tears appear, the struggle for comprehension dissolves. Tears bypass intellectual defenses. They go straight to the heart. You can disagree with someone's ideas all day long, but it's very hard to remain unmoved by their tears. In that moment, the debate falls silent, and the recognition of shared humanity takes its place. Psychologically, this is rooted in empathy. Human beings are wired for connection. Neuroscientists have studied what are known as mirror neurons, the brain structures that allow us to feel, on some level, what we see others experiencing. When you see someone in pain, your own body responds. And when you see someone crying, something inside you resonates with that sorrow. You may not know why they are crying, but you feel the weight of it nonetheless. That resonance is not weakness. It is the foundation of morality itself. Without empathy, compassion would be impossible. Without compassion, society would unravel into indifference and cruelty. Tears keep us tethered to each other, reminding us that our fates are intertwined. Philosophically, tears challenge the illusion of isolation. We like to imagine ourselves as separate, autonomous individuals, masters of our own destiny, untouched by the struggles of others. But tears reveal the opposite. They remind us that suffering is universal, that love is universal, that longing is universal. So, no matter how different our external circumstances may be, the internal experience of joy and loss binds us together. When someone we don't know weeps, something in us still recognizes them, not as a stranger, but as a fellow traveler in this difficult, beautiful journey of life. Consider the moments when tears bring people together in the most unlikely ways. Strangers comforting each other after a tragedy, a hardened adversary softening when he sees his opponent cry, a family broken by years of silence finally reconnecting when tears break through pride. These moments are not accidents. They are the result of a truth deeper than ideology, deeper than resentment, deeper than the stories we tell ourselves to stay divided. Tears cut through those stories and remind us of what we share. This is why tears often move us more than words ever could. Think of a powerful speech, eloquent, polished, logical. It may impress us, even inspire us. But if the speaker's voice suddenly breaks, if tears begin to form in their eyes, everything changes. The room grows still, the message pierces the intellect and goes straight into the heart. We no longer simply hear what they are saying, we feel it. That shift from hearing to feeling is what makes the difference between superficial influence and profound connection. There is also something sacred in this exchange. When you witness another person cry, you are being entrusted with a glimpse into their innermost self. They are allowing you to see them without armor, without pretense. That is a gift, even if it makes you uncomfortable. To stand in the presence of someone else's tears is to stand on holy ground, because what you are encountering is not just emotion, it is truth. And to honor that truth is to honor the humanity that you share with them. Yet in our world, we often dismiss or ignore tears. We avert our eyes. We say, "Don't cry," as if crying were shameful. But what we are really doing is cutting ourselves off from the opportunity for connection. We are refusing to enter into the shared humanity that tears offer us. Imagine instead if we treated tears not as an inconvenience, but as an invitation to compassion, to understanding, to presence. How different our relationships, even our societies, might be if we had the courage to respond to that invitation. On a more personal level, think about the times when someone else's tears have moved you. Perhaps it was a parent or a child or even a stranger. Why did those tears matter? Because in that moment, you were reminded that you are not alone, that the pain you carry is mirrored in others, that the joy you feel is echoed in them as well. This recognition doesn't erase suffering, but it makes it bearable, it makes it meaningful. Because suffering without connection feels like isolation, but suffering shared becomes something else. It becomes solidarity, and solidarity has the power to heal. And that is the essence of shared humanity in silent expression. Tears dissolve the illusions that divide us. They strip away titles, roles, and masks. They reveal the raw human underneath, and in that revelation, we find a point of contact that words so often fail to create. So the next time you see someone crying, resist the urge to look away. Instead, let yourself be present. Let yourself be moved, because in that moment, you are not merely witnessing another's pain, you are participating in the great conversation of humanity. A conversation spoken not in sentences, but in tears. And remember this, in every tear that falls, there is a reminder that beneath all our differences, we are the same. There is a kind of weight that comes from emotions we refuse to face. Everyone knows it, the heaviness in the chest, the tightening in the throat, the restless nights when thoughts circle endlessly but never resolve. We live in a culture that prizes productivity, that tells us to keep moving forward, to stay strong, to get over it quickly. And in that rush to suppress what we feel, we often forget that unexpressed emotion doesn't simply vanish. It lingers, it collects, it buries itself deep in the body and the mind until eventually it begins to shape us in ways we do not even notice. Tears exist in part to release that burden. They are the heart's pressure valve, the soul's way of keeping us from collapsing under the weight of all we cannot say. Psychologically, this is critical. When a person refuses to cry, when they suppress their grief or their longing, they often believe they are being strong. But suppression is not strength, it is postponement. The unresolved emotion remains festering, often resurfacing as anxiety, depression, or even physical illness. Research in psychology has shown time and again that emotions repressed too long can manifest in the body tightness in the muscles, problems with the immune system, even chronic disease. Tears are not just a sentimental gesture. They are a mechanism of release, one of nature's ways of protecting us from the corrosive effects of silence. Consider how you feel after a genuine cry, not the shallow tears of frustration, but the deep, uncontrollable sobs that come when your heart finally lets go. The body shakes, the breath falters, the tears flow, and when it is over, there is a strange quiet, a calm. It may not erase the pain, but it creates space around it. You are no longer suffocating beneath the weight. You can breathe again. That is the healing function of tears. They take the chaos inside and move it outward, where it can be released, acknowledged, and integrated into the story of who you are. Philosophically, this speaks to a profound truth. Healing requires honesty. You cannot be healed from a lie. You cannot be made whole if you are busy pretending you are unbroken. And yet, so many of us attempt to patch over our wounds with distraction, denial, or false smiles. Tears disrupt that illusion. They insist on truth. When you cry, you admit, even if only to yourself, that something matters, something hurts. Something cannot be ignored. In that admission lies the possibility of renewal. Because once you acknowledge the truth, you can begin to work with it rather than against it. This is why tears often accompany turning points in life. Think of the moments when people finally decide to change, when someone trapped in bitterness lets go, when someone carrying guilt finally seeks forgiveness, when someone hiding pain finally shares it. Those breakthroughs are almost always accompanied by tears. Why? Because tears mark the moment when truth emerges, when the dam of silence breaks and the river of reality flows freely. That flood is painful, but it is also cleansing. It makes space for a new beginning. There is also a relational dimension here. Unspoken emotions create distance between people. If you are carrying pain but refuse to express it, those around you sense the wall, even if they cannot name it. Relationships wither under that unspoken weight. But when tears are allowed, when emotions are voiced through them, connection becomes possible again. To cry with someone is to invite them into your most hidden self. That act can restore intimacy where silence created separation. In fact, some of the deepest bonds are forged in shared tears, not in shared laughter. And yet the fear of appearing weak prevents many from allowing this kind of healing to happen. We prefer to keep up appearances, to present ourselves as composed, controlled, unshaken. But here's the irony: when we suppress tears to appear strong, we actually become weaker. We become brittle, like glass under pressure. One small crack and everything shatters. When we allow tears, on the other hand, we remain flexible. We bend under the weight of emotion, but we do not break. That is what healing looks like, not the absence of struggle, but the ability to move through struggle without being destroyed by it. Spiritually too, tears carry weight. Many traditions view tears as prayers without words, as offerings of the heart that bypass the intellect. In that sense, crying becomes not just an act of release, but of surrender, a way of acknowledging that life is larger than we can control, and that sometimes the most human response is not to fight, but to weep. That surrender is not defeat, it is a form of acceptance that opens the door to peace. So when you feel the tears rising, do not think of them as failure. Think of them as a message from within. This matters. Pay attention. Tears are not an interruption of your journey. They are part of the path itself. They keep you from becoming a prisoner of your own silence. They invite you to let go of what you've been carrying so that you can move forward lighter, freer, more whole. If you refuse them, you may manage to keep walking, but the burden grows heavier with every step. If you accept them, you find that healing comes not in spite of your tears, but through them. And that is the truth I want to leave you with. Tears are not the enemy of strength, but the ally of healing. They are not a sign of breaking down, but of breaking open. They cleanse, they connect, they renew breath. Because sometimes the only way forward is to let what is hidden in the heart flow out through the eyes. And in that release, the soul learns how to breathe again,